Back on February 15th of 2021, Highwire Games came out and said, hey, we're going to make 6 Days in Fallujah again. And this is kind of controversial. It was canceled in 2008 because it's set in the Iraq War that just happened like 2 decades ago. And we were actively fighting in the country. Oh yeah, like last year and this year, there's people there. So this is kind of a controversial game just from the get-go because of the fact that we have people there and it's so recent in people's memories. Now, on top of that, Peter Tamte, I hope I got his name right, Tamte, went out and said that we're not going to make this a political game. We're not going to investigate and go into why the Marines and soldiers were sent there. We're going to go through and just talk about their experiences. And yes, I can get that and I can kind of understand that from a documentary point of view, but war is an echelon of politics. It's when the politicians fail that war comes about. So you can't say that a game is going to be apolitical and then make a war game. But wait, we do that all the time. We have a ton of war games that go through. You have Call of Duty, you have World War IIs, you have Vietnam era wars, you have wars that are set in World War I with Battlefield 1. And none of these games are political wars because they're all shooters and they're so far removed that we don't think about the politics behind those games. We also don't see the atrocities that were committed during those wars. We don't see the slaughter by the Japanese Empire in China, Korea, the South Pacific. We don't see Auschwitz and other concentration camps and how the Russians and the Germans really hated each other in World War II. And we don't see Americans putting Japanese into camps. Like, war's not a pretty thing. And I get that by focusing very specifically on service members' experiences, that we're trying to get to a certain story and we're trying to preserve some history. And that's actually kind of what they said next. So on March 8th, the studio comes out and says, hey, we understand that this game's going to be political. No matter what happens, any war game's going to be political. We get this. But you have to understand that this walkback, it's not going to solve all the issues. So let's talk about what 6 Days in Fallujah is listed as right now. And right now it's listed as a first-person shooter, tactical shooter. But on top of this, it's going to be narrated by dozens of service members and by 25 Iraqi civilians. And they're talking about their experiences in Fallujah in 2004 during the Second Battle of Fallujah. And now this was set up with Al-Qaeda and insurgents having gone in and fortified the city. And the US said, hey, you're not going to get to keep it. We're coming in strong. That policy, send in Marines and Army. They didn't choose to go in. Most of them probably signed up right after 2001 in the World Trade Center. So there's some nuance there. So these service members are telling their story about what they experienced. Pretty interesting, pretty intense. And I think that's where we can get into a little bit more detail. But what I think is kind of the biggest deal about this game is actually it's going to be the offset story that kind of brings it home. And I think that this is going to be the glue that makes it all stick together if it's done right. And that's an Iraqi father trying to get his family out of the city in the midst of a battle between two opposing forces that, in all honesty, don't care if there's people in the middle because they just want to get rid of each other. So what is the game not? Because I've already seen a lot of rumors flying all over Twitter, all over YouTube about how this game is going to gloss over the incredible, awful things that happened during this war. And I kind of don't know if that's going to happen. What 6 Days in Fallujah is not a multiplayer game like Call of Duty. Yes, it has multiplayer. Multiplayer co-op is what's listed right now. That's it. Not a versus game mode. Multiplayer co-op. And 6 Days in Fallujah is not going through and making players commit atrocities like doing shake and bake or doing anything like no Russian in Call of Duty. There's no shooting civilians that's being forced upon the player. There's also some other things that aren't happening, and it's not an accurate representation of what's actually happening in the greater scheme of things. It's not explaining the politics and the policy behind sending these people into the city. For that, you have to go do some reading. And for me, I recommend the book Cobra 2, which will kind of set the backdrop of the entire Iraqi war. I'll link it down below. Now, Highwire Games and Victoria, I'm not going to say that correctly, have taken some steps in the right direction since the disaster of a February 15th article And they've gone through and said that they are highlighting the Iraqi father and his family to tell a very horrific story of being the civilians trapped between those two juggernauts. And as a parent, we have no greater fear than being unable to help or protect our kids. And this game should be able to show this and give some empathy to the civilians that were trapped in Fallujah at this point in time. And that brings us to the potential that this game has. Because 6 Days in Fallujah really has a groundbreaking methodology that they're trying to go in with right now. And I really think that making a documentary game is incredibly powerful, incredibly hard, because this hasn't been done before. And if it has, it's been done so poorly, I can't find it. And it could set the stage for a new method of playing games and a new way of games being interpreted. Now, don't get me wrong, games are mostly seen as a toy or an entertainment device right now. But at their inception, so were movies, TV, music, the radio. Video games are a medium, and it can tell stories in a way that no other medium can tell. To be able to retell that story, to have the narration of the people that were there and put the player into those decision points, because they're not slow decision points. You get in and it happens. You don't have time to think. Your brain reacts. That is the human cost of war being done at the tactical level. And I think that's the focus that they're trying to get to. But I don't know yet. And I think by not underpinning that tactical focus with the broad policy that got them there is going to put a huge shortfall in this documentary game. And that brings us now to why the game's on thin ice. Well, building empathy for the service member and that split-second life or death decision I just talked about is great in theory. But in practice, it's really hard to recreate that fear, the anxiety, the sleeplessness, and other factors that the young men and women who are holding rifles are now having to point them at other people and making a decision to shoot or not shoot. Well, they know they're going to get shot at, and every building that they could walk into could be their tomb. I hope the game doesn't try and please everybody, but I do hope the game tries to get it right. Yeah, it might not get the policy part right. It needs to. But if it can build empathy, if it can build some sympathy towards everybody that was involved in this fight and how it screws with people's lives after, then maybe it'll do its job. So where can this game go in the future? Well, at Ridir Gaming here, we really want to see a demo or be able to play through a level before it comes out and actually give a good, honest opinion of if this is an accurate representation or if this is kind of a glossed over, patriotic, hoorah, hoorah, let's get some type game. Because if it's one of those and it's not accurate, then there's no point in releasing it to the public. But if it's done correctly, if it's done right, if it's done in such a way that it makes it a worthy Ken Burns type experience, then absolutely. Now, if it's designed extremely well, this game could actually go through and build that empathy, build the sympathy, build the relationship with the individuals that were there, the civilians that were trapped. It could actually open the envelope for the entire genre of docu-gaming and make it where instead of having to watch the Ken Burns documentary, which are fantastic if you haven't watched any, you could play them. It's a different way of getting the knowledge to the next generation. Because those that don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So far, there's been some terrible PR, and Peter needs to shut his mouth. Everybody's going to take it the wrong way, but it just needs to be quiet. There needs to be positive, pointed, and focused feedback to the community on what this game's actually going to do. And it needs to address some of its strongest critics because it is extremely politically charged. It's pretty recent. There's a lot of salt in the wound. And yeah, they don't do it. It's probably going to be dead on arrival. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my opinion. Now that I've spieled it for a while, I'm going to hold my opinion until we actually get the game. And I'm going to play it. And I'm going to give my honest review of the game and then the documentary and that docu-game style. Because if they do it well, I'm going to be extremely excited. But if they do this so poorly that they were just going for sales, I don't know. I'll be one of the first ones to bash them on social media and say, hey, y'all need to shutter. But if they do it great, then I'll be one of the first ones to herald them and say, hey, let's go tackle another tough subject. This has been Wes from Ridir Gaming. This is probably rambled on longer than most people would have liked. If you stuck around this long, then I greatly appreciate it. Please consider hitting like and subscribe. I really enjoy making these videos and trying to help make the community a better place at any given time. With that, we always say, do good, play hard, game on. And this is Wes from Ridir Gaming. I'll see you next time.